Preparing themselves for all the sacrifice and scarcity of war, the women of the Western Hemisphere are taking careful stock of the nation's larder. For none know better than the wives and mothers responsible for the country's health that on the food supply of a fighting people can hang victory or defeat. Already before their eyes are the devastated lands of Europe, the flooded farms of the lowlands, the wheat fields of the Ukraine blazing in the wake of the German tanks. And in tragic contrast to America's abundance are Europe's bread lines, symbols of the hunger stalking a war-torn continent. And today, the wartime leaders of the Western world are turning with increasing attention and concern to their food front. They know that from hemisphere soil must come the food for 140 million Americans working through a long, hard war. But they know, too, that on the new world will fall the task of feeding allies overseas. Already to beleaguered Britain are going food shipments totaling $2 million a day, and these represent only her most urgent needs. And they must remember that the people of Russia, hitherto supplied from their own well-organized collective farms, may at any time call upon their North American allies for untold quantities of food. For Russia's best lands, best farms, best equipment are gone, laid waste by the tactic of the scorched earth. And already the experience of nations long at war shows that the special foods needed to sustain energy at peak pitch are very different from those which North America has hitherto been accustomed to produce. To British munition workers, long used to bread and jam, fish and chips and tea, has come a revolutionary change of diet. There is now free milk for all, and to meet the strain of long hours, factory canteens throughout the land have priorities in butter, cheese, and meat, the fuels that renew the strength of tired limbs. From blacked-out Britain, too, comes the evidence of scientists that certain foods can actually increase the sharpness of eyes, searching the sky through the long hours of darkness. Each evening, as the RAF bomber crews plan their long, dark flights to Germany, special rations are prepared for them. Rations in which are mixed raw carrots, liver, and fish oils, foods rich in the vitamins which counteract night blindness. And army dietitians the world over are now saying that the strenuous life of the modern fighting man demands a menu twice as high in food values as that of the civilian. Fresh meat, fresh vegetables, dairy produce, fruit and eggs, all the varied foods that make for energy and health. In World War II, as in Napoleon's time, an army marches on its stomach. But today, a nation's army includes every man, woman, and child within its frontiers, whether in uniform or not. And nutrition experts are gravely warning that 1/3 of the New World's people are undernourished and in no condition to stand the strain of war. And the realization is swiftly growing that if the health of the nation is to be stepped up to full war pitch, there must come sweeping economic changes, and especially a change at the source of all food, the land itself. From the Saskatchewan River to the Rio Grande, the boundless acres of North America are still largely devoted to growing the great basic crops of peacetime: cotton, tobacco, wheat. Today, the need is for a drastic change, a change to the varied health-giving foods urgently demanded by nations under arms. And America knows that in re-gearing her food front to the special needs of war, there must be no too little and too late. For across the sea lies an enemy who is already wielding the deadly weapon of food with a cruelty unparalleled in history. Vivid for every Nazi are the memories of World War I, when hunger brought about Germany's national collapse. And out of the shame of those fateful days arose the first cry of National Socialism. No more charity from foreign powers. Instead, a great new program for the German land. The program of Hitler's fanatical Minister of Agriculture, Walter Darre.
Ist die erste Voraussetzung für das Blühen und Gedeihen unserer Industrie, für den deutschen Binnenhandel und für den deutschen Export.
Broadcast through the peaceful farmlands of the Reich as the mystic Nazi doctrine of blood and soil, Darre's plan had a single strategic purpose: to make Germany self-sufficient in food. With his acres invaded by a youthful army of unpaid helpers, the German farmer now found himself under rigid orders as to what crops to grow and in what quantity. Meanwhile, across the Alps and fascist Italy, the same cry for self-sufficiency arose, seizing the great estates and decreeing the reclamation of large areas of marshland. Mussolini himself led a frenzied campaign to triple the production of homegrown food. And while the democracies lived amidst the anarchy of plenty, the Axis nations adopted a new order of frugality. Their choice was simple: guns or butter. All through the years of preparation, German imports of fat meat found their way not into the Hausfrau's basket, but into the arsenals, for fat is an important component of high explosive. Displaying in their foreign trade a curious lack of interest in the staple foods, they bought thousands of tons of apples, not to swell the larders of their people, but to supply the distilling plants manufacturing power alcohol, thus releasing precious high-grade fuel for the Luftwaffe's planes. Millions of gallons of German milk were sent not to the schools and hospitals of the Reich, but to the refineries, there to be made into lubricating oil for the submarine fleets building in the shipyards of Kiel and Hamburg. Only exception to the ruthless order of belt-tightening inflicted on the German people were the young men destined to take their places in the front line of the Wehrmacht. For them was reserved the best of everything. But Germany faced one great food shortage. Her cattle were far too few to provide the beef and dairy produce required to sustain a nation on the march. To work went German scientists, searching the vegetable kingdom for a nutritive equivalent of meat and milk. Special subject of their attention was China, for they suspected that the world-famous strength and hardihood of the Chinese peasants was the direct result of the food they ate. And in China, they found the secret: the soybean. Unimpressive in appearance, dull to taste, the soybean nevertheless provides the human body with twice as much strength as meat at a quarter the price. With her eyes on events to come, Germany planted acre after acre of her land with soybean, and even sponsored the development of large areas of it in Hungary, Romania, and other Balkan countries. Ground into a fine flour known as Edel soya, noble soya, the beans are mixed into almost every dish served to the Nazi forces, including even sausages. For years more, the German army tested the soybean as a basic ration, carefully examining the performance of troops who ate it as a staple food. And after the conquest of Poland and France, the Nazis claimed that it was the soybean which enabled the German infantry to endure the lightning marches of 30 miles a day. And those who have pondered the deeper realities of strategy believe that it may even be the secret weapon of which Hitler has so often boasted. Today, Germany's food plans go far beyond the mere task of keeping her armies on the march. In the blueprint for the new order, now being thrust on the puppet leaders of subjugated countries, Germany proper will expand so as to include within her borders the great industrial areas of the lowlands in France, Slovakia, and Poland. The rest of Europe, denuded of all industrial enterprise, is to become a gigantic farm, supplying the master race with food. And already, reports telling of trainload after trainload of farm produce heading from the conquered countries into Germany prove that this fiendish plan, hitherto dismissed as paper fantasy, is actually being put into practice. And experts who have estimated the plunder are now agreed that the chances of starving the Third Reich into submission are small indeed. Fearful, by contrast, is the distress of the conquered lands, where the Nazis are deliberately withholding food from the people, for they are well aware that the undernourished are too numbed to revolt. On the battle-scarred fields of France, herds and crops are tended by the inadequate labor of old men. For of France's 2 million prisoners of war, the great majority are farm workers, held in Germany to create food shortage in their own land. And in the stricken cities, food is the bait used to draw into Germany the skilled labor which the Reich needs for its war industries. What simpler than to throw a French or Polish worker out of his accustomed job, reduce him to the borderline of starvation, and then hold before his eyes the promise of work and a full stomach awaiting him in the fatherland. Said Baltadare in 1940, the new aristocracy of German masters is going to introduce a modern form of medieval slavery. Today, the prophecy is actually coming true. Hunger, the instrument of its fulfillment. For those that remain behind, there's a rigid and humiliating system of food priorities. Priorities governed by the attitude of the recipient to the occupying forces. First, along with quislings and minor spies on the pay of the Gestapo, come the families of those who might at some future time be useful in the establishment of the new order. Next in the hierarchy are obedient new subjects of the master race, including, somewhat naturally, those most tragic victims of Europe's misery, the children. Last of all, and forced to take whatever scraps are thrown to them, come the Jews and the insane. And for proud nations who refuse to bow to the Nazi yoke, the fate decreed is literal starvation. Terrible are reports leaking out of Greece, telling of a death roll of 2,000 a day in Athens alone. We do not know, they say, how we shall continue to exist, save on indignation and hatred. Across the landscape of the Western world, the granaries filled with surplus wheat tell of relief ready for suffering peoples on the day of peace. And in the meantime, American agriculture turns to its vital task of speeding the approach of victory. Key base for United Nations offensive plans against Germany is Britain, and first concern of Allied strategists is to keep the people of the British Isles supplied with food and weapons until the full attacking power of the New World is mobilized. Rich indeed is the English countryside, with its rolling downs and dipping valleys, its parklands and its pastures. But into the smoky towns, where lies the source of Britain's power, are crowded some 40 million people, only 1/3 of whose food is grown on home soil. For those who make war on England, the ideal weapon is blockade. Heading out into the Atlantic in their wolf pack formations, the U-boat crews of World War II well remember the motto of their first leader, Admiral von Tirpitz: "The deed is all." With a fleet believed to total some 300 submarines, with heavily armed surface raiders to swell the hunt. The battle of starvation now being waged against the Atlantic convoys is far fiercer, far more deadly than the all-out U-boat warfare which nearly brought England to her knees in the grim days of 1917. From the Denmark Strait to the Sargasso Sea, from Halifax to Cape Wrath, the story is the same. Fine ships lost, brave seamen killed or captured, and cargoes of precious food drifting on the gray Atlantic swell. And in this war, Britain's larder faces a new danger: air bombardment, deliberately directed at the warehouses and storage depots of her ports. By spring of 1942, with their distribution system seriously impaired by bombing, with their rations being cut and cut again, Britons found themselves facing a food shortage graver than at any time in the history of their island. Even their beloved cup of tea became a luxury. And surveying their crippled ships, naval experts declared that far from allocating extra tonnage to importing new supplies, the shipping space devoted to food must be slashed at once to 1/3 its pre-war volume. Today, a nationwide campaign is launched to increase the productivity of England's soil. Already, back in crops, are 4 million acres, neglected through the years when too little thought was given to the land. And in every town and city, wherever a patch of earth can be made to bear, there are allotments dug and cultivated in spare time to ensure at least a local food supply against future bombing. Even in the London Zoo, so well known to peacetime visitors from overseas, the cages have new occupants, less interesting to study, but more essential for immediate needs. And at harvest time, the Army exchanges the rifle for the rake and fights on a new battlefront. But for all this, Britain still cannot provide more than half the strength-renewing foods her people need. Small wonder that with her other shipping routes cut off or gravely endangered, she should rely more and more on the North Atlantic and on the great food reservoir of the New World beyond. And today, from the capitals of North America, from Washington and from Ottawa, the call is going out for a new strategy for the land. Less of the huge peacetime crops like wheat, more of the very foods vital to the stamina of fighting nations. For the special nutritive foods that Britain needs: pork and bacon, milk and cheese and vegetables, poultry and eggs, are the self-same foods America needs to raise her people's health to battle strength. And in this wartime revolution, now sweeping across the food front of the Western world, those who look into the future are perceiving one of the profoundest changes of our time, for they foresee the inevitable approach of a considered plan in which the American farmer, finally freed from the glutted markets and surpluses of former days, will devote his land to the real food needs of his fellow men. And And as the ships head seaward with their cargoes to feed a globe in arms, food for nations fighting from the shores of the Mediterranean to the beaches of the Pacific, they leave behind them a battlefront where sun and siege and human skill are forging not only a mighty weapon of conquest, but a charter of freedom from want for the new world which will arise out of these dreadful days. Among the broad horizons of this land, every American has his first and deepest roots. And in the hour of danger, every American turns again with renewed faith to this, his native soil, the soil that will win the war and write the future.